Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are going back to basics and we're just going to talk about some basic tools that I use to get the most out of limited research time. So whether you've been doing family history for years or whether you're brand new, there are probably some things that you can learn from my workflow that will help assist in your workflow. As much as we would like to think we have unlimited time, and as much as it sometimes feels like that at 1 or 2 in the morning when we're doing research, the fact of the matter is that a lot of us are constrained by, a lunch hour or that hour at night after the children go to bed or whatever your circumstances may be. And so I'm just going to present to you just a few brief ideas for ways that I keep track of my research, so that when I sit down in some of those limited time frames, I can dive right in without having to figure out where I was or what I was doing or what's going on. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to talk first about keeping a notebook. Now you can do this paper or digital. I have done both. I sometimes continue to do both. Very often I will sit with a notebook or a pad of paper next to me while I research just to jot down notes. I am trying to make the move entirely digital, and so I am using OneNote more and more often. A couple of things I would encourage you to do if you're going to have a notebook is to have a master to-do list. Now, the point of this list is not for it to become so lengthy that it becomes overwhelming, but to just keep it short and sweet so that when you sit down to do family history research, you can just look at this list of 3 or 4 things and pick one of them and get right to work. If you're going to keep a notebook, I would also maybe encourage you to have separate sections for notes by family so that it doesn't take up a lot of your space. Now, I'll share with you the OneNote notebook that I use. I use OneNote pretty extensively for work and for my volunteer service and for some of the things with my family, just to keep track of everything. And so OneNote allows you to have a whole bunch of different notebooks, and I have those over here. And then within each notebook, I can have sections. So I've done that. I've got a master research list section, and then I've got some sections by some of the surnames of projects that I'm working on in my family history. And then I am responsible for a regional family history program here in Utah, so I've got a section for that. And then right now I'm actually at the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy, and so I'm keeping my class notes and taking care of my class research in a section I've created for that. Then within each section, you can also have multiple pages. And so here we have in the very first page of the very first section, this is my master to-do list. And you'll notice it's only got 5 things on it. And like I said, I'm keeping that short and sweet. I don't want to overwhelm myself with a million to-dos. And so as I complete one of those things, I just delete it off the list. And as I add things, I just add it to the list. But my goal is to keep that list not much longer than about 4 or 5 things. I also have just made a note over here about a particular book. It's a family history book that I found. I actually was able to get an electronic copy of it, so I downloaded it to my phone, and I also downloaded a copy of it to my hard drive, and so I keep a note just of what page I'm on so that I can pick that up and keep doing that. A little different than a bookmark system, but that works. I also keep a bunch of checklists in my notebook that allow me to just keep track of the kinds of records that I should be looking for and the websites that I use most frequently. I do that, again, just to make sure I've exhausted all my sources. So when I'm looking at a particular person or researching a particular individual, I can just come back here to these master checklists and I can say, have I found this? Have I found this? Have I found this? And I can just run through the checklist. Have I checked all of these websites? And I can run through that checklist. So that's how I use that. Then I also, like I said, have sections for each family that I'm working on actively right now. Here's a probate record that I transcribed. Sometimes it's easier to transcribe the record here in OneNote and then copy and paste it into my family tree. Sometimes I'm not sure how the people all fit into my family tree, and so I'm trying to make those connections. So in this particular case, I made a list of surnames that are in the first 3 generations of the family of the individual I'm looking for. So I'm looking for his children and his grandchildren, and I wanted to make sure that I knew all of the families or the surnames that were associated with that as I did that research. So I just created these little surname lists so that I can keep those up on the screen and refer to them often. I've also been comparing the migratory patterns of this family as they moved from North Carolina to Kentucky. I've got a list of the families, the collateral families that were in the 1790 census, and then a list of families that are showing up on the Warren County, Kentucky tax lists 7 years later. Again, just trying to keep track of who's migrating with who's intermarrying with who, and that's really important when you start looking at trying to identify the parents or the spouses of individuals. You have to use some of these techniques. So I do things like census comparisons. So you'll see here, this is, I've got the 1820 through 1860 census list here on my grid. I've listed the members of the family. In some cases, I don't even know who those family members are, just that it's a female or a male who is in a certain age range in a certain census. In some cases, I've been able to identify which member of the family that is, but this just allows me to make sure that I've accounted for everyone. It helps me see things like patterns of, maybe there was a remarriage because he had this wife who was 30 in 1830, and then the wife is showing up as 20 in 1840. That's a big indicator that I've got a second wife here. Lots of different ways that I keep track of that stuff, but it's easier to do this kind of work in a notebook, either a paper notebook or a digital notebook, to make sure that I understand all the parts and pieces and how everybody in the family fits together before I start entering them into my family history database. And so something like this, I might work on, 5, 6, 7 hours spread out over 3 or 4 different research sessions, essentially, times when I have to sit down and work on my research. But I don't have to start all over because I've kept track of it here. And I know, okay, well, next I need to go look for all these people in the 1860 census. And then maybe the next time I sit down, okay, well, now that I understand who all these people are and how they're all connected, now I can go enter that information into my family tree. So that's how I use my notebook, or just some of the ways that I use my notebook to keep myself sane, to make sure that I'm collecting all the parts and pieces, to make sure that when I sit down to do my research, I can dive right in and not have to waste time figuring out where I was last time. Something else that I would encourage you to do is to use the notes feature on your tree. Keep track of the research that you've already done. Keep track of the research that's needed. That's going to help maintain your sanity. Now, this is a little bit different than the notebook idea that I just showed you. The purpose of the notes feature in your tree is to help you keep track of information about a specific individual, whereas I use my notebook more at a family level or at a research level before I enter people into my tree. So I've shared this with a lot of you before in previous videos, but a refresher is always a good idea. And I always use this great-grandfather of mine, Albert Jefferson Kerr, as my example. So his notes don't change much because I use it as an example. But here's my tree. Here's my great-grandfather in my tree. Even just using this view, I can quickly see where some of my holes are that I maybe need to spend some time researching. So I'm missing parents in a couple of these generations. For some of these people, I am missing, for some of these women, I'm missing maiden names. I can see that really clearly because I've got those 5 underscores showing up as that blank line. So even just viewing in a pedigree view is a really easy way to say, here's some place I can start. Now, if I go to the profile page for my great-grandfather, make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it on your screen. I do have my research tools turned on here in the menu, and you just do that here under tools. You can see I have a little checkbox by show research tools. If I uncheck that, you're going to see that goes away. I can check it. It comes right back. I like to have these research tools left on because what it allows me to do is just really quickly get to my notes. So here are my notes for my great-grandfather. You can see every time I find a record, I transcribe that record into the notes so that I know exactly what it says. And I've done that with all the censuses. I've done that with his World War II draft registration card. I've done that with information out of the family Bible. I've done that with the obituary, whatever the case may be. Anytime I find a record, I transcribe it into the notes, and I do it in timeline fashion. So regardless of what order I found the record, I put it in chronological order in the place that it goes. And then you can see here I've also made notes, little to-do notes, and I've bolded them so that they kind of jump off the page at me a little bit. So that, again, the point of this is when I sit down to research and I've only got an hour or 45 minutes, I don't want to spend time wondering what to do next. I want to just sit down and start researching. And so this allows me to pull up my notes and quickly say, well, you know what? I haven't done this research yet. So maybe that's what I'll spend this time on. And those research notes allow me to do that very quickly. So that's how I use research notes. I talked about those standard checklists that I use, that I have at the front of my notebook, my digital notebook. Make a list based on where your family research is of all the records you should be looking for a particular individual to make sure that you've done that reasonably exhaustive search. And I just keep it as a handy checklist, again, to refer to. You can be as detailed or as minimal as you want. Mine is fairly minimal, but it's because I have a lot of that information in my head. If you're new to family history, you might want to consider making a more detailed list to get you started. Sometimes, and I still do this on occasion when I'm working on a particularly sticky research problem, I will make a detailed list for the specific person I'm researching before I even start my research. So, for example, if I happen to know that a man is listed in the 1860 census and he's 30 years old, that means he was probably born in about 1829 or 1830. So I'll make a list of all the census records that I should be able to find him in. I would start with, I've got him in 1860, so I would move forward, 1870, 1880. The 1890 census was destroyed in a fire, so I should look for him in 1900, all the way up through the 1940 census if possible. He would have been 90 years old, but I'm going to check all of those just to make sure I haven't missed him anywhere. And then I'm going to work my way backwards. I should be able to find him in 1850. I probably won't be able to find him in 1840 by name because he was a child, and he would be listed under the head of household, which was the only thing listed on the census. But I'm going to check that 1840 census anyway for anybody with the same surname who was living in the place where he should have been living at the time, just so that I can get an idea of who his possible parents may have been. I'm going to do the same thing with the 1830 census. He may have been born in 1830, but maybe he was born in 1829, and so he would have been a child that year. So I will, like I said, I do a lot of that in my head, but sometimes if I want to be very methodical, I will actually write out that list so that I can check those things off as I find them. If he was born in 1830, he should probably have served in the Civil War. And so I'm going to want to write down all the different places and types of Civil War service records, pension files, muster rolls, regimental histories, like anything that's going to have to do with Civil War service. I'm going to write down a list of those kinds of records so that I know I need to go check for each of those. If he was living, in Florida, for example, Florida takes a state census, and if I didn't know that, I could research state censuses to see what state censuses exist. But in this case, I happen to know Florida keeps a state census, and so I should be able to find him in 1875, 1885. I'm going to make a list, add those things to my list. When did Florida start keeping marriage records? I might need to research that before I add that to my list. Maybe he wasn't born in Florida, that's just where he was living. So I need to check where he was born and make a list of, do birth records exist at the time? Do probate records exist that his parents might have left that would include him in their particular will? What newspapers exist for the local places where he lived? So a lot of times I do all of that research about the kinds of records and what records might exist before I ever start doing any searches about a specific individual. So making a checklist is sometimes part of my research process so that I know exactly what I'm looking for before I start looking. And then this is just a kind of a basic suggestion. Sometimes when I sit down, I don't want to get into a big sticky research problem, or I don't want to dive into searching records and going page by page through probates or military records. I just want to, do a little bit of tree cleanup. And that's something really easy that I can do in 20 or 30 minutes. There are several different ways to do this, but one of the ways that I do this is I will actually go to my list of all people, and you can find that from the profile page. If you just click on the little search icon here, you'll have it there, list of all people at the bottom of your tree. You can also, if you go back to your pedigree chart, you're going to find it over here on the right under the search person button. You've got that list of all people. So I am just going to pull up my list of all people. Again, let me make this a little bigger so that you can see it. And one of the things that this allows me to do is just to really quickly see where I'm missing information. So here I'm missing maiden names of all of these women. Maybe that's somewhere I could dive in and start working. I'm missing some complete dates here. Or maybe I could just skim through this list and see, are any of my dates formatted incorrectly? There is a genealogical standard for dates, and it's day, the 2-digit day, month, and then year. And so maybe I need to go through and clean some of those up, and I can tell right away I do, because the appropriate format for that month is the 3-character month, like you see here on December 27th, 1927. But I do have some dates here where I've got the full date, full month written out. And so I could just really quickly right-click on that person's name, open up that profile page, and then I can come in here and I can just do a quick edit, and I can fix that particular month and save it. And then I can close that, and I'm right back here to my list of all people, and that date has been corrected. So that's just something I can do really easily. Same thing with some of these locations. Sometimes these locations get added because I've attached a record, and I want to make sure that I standardize my locations, and those locations are best standardized by city or township, county, state, and then country abbreviation for the United States. And so I can just quickly go in and standardize that. And then I can refresh this list, and you can see that's now been standardized. So that's something that I can quickly do when I have limited research time. And I would encourage you on occasion to spend your time cleaning up some of those dates and locations in your tree. That's going to help you. It's going to make sure that all the automated tools are going to work correctly as you look for hints, as you search records. That's going to help you do that. It's also going to help anybody who's trying to connect with you. It'll help the system recognize that these are in fact the same person. And particularly if you've taken the DNA test, you want to make sure that your dates and your locations are standardized, and that your women in your tree are listed by their maiden names, not their married names. And if you don't know their maiden name, just leave it blank or add those 5 underscores. So again, anytime we follow the genealogical standards, it's going to make all the tools work better for us. So those are just some of the few things that I do to make sure that when I sit down to do my research, I can dive right in, make the most of the time that I have available, whether that time is 40 minutes on a lunch break or 4 hours in the middle of the night, doesn't matter. The idea is to get the most out of the time that we have available to do our family history research. And of course, to make sure that we're climbing our own family tree. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.